You ever think of someone and then your phone rings and it's them? Or maybe you have a really specific dream and then something eerily similar happens the very next day. You know, most of us just brush these things off as a coincidence. But what if there's something more? Today, we're diving deep into Carl Jung's fascinating concept of synchronicity, these meaningful coincidences. And we're going to look at some brand new research that's taking this idea from a cool story to a real, verifiable tool in therapy.
All right, let's just jump right in with the classic example. Jung is working with this young woman who is incredibly rational, almost to a fault, and it's making her therapy stall. One day, she tells him about a dream she had where someone gave her a golden scarab beetle. As she's telling him this, Jung hears a tapping on the window. He turns, and there it is, a rose cheffer beetle, which is the closest you can get to a golden scarab in that part of the world. He literally caught it and handed it to her. That single unbelievable moment shattered her rational defenses and completely changed the course of her therapy. That right there is synchronicity.
So, what are we really talking about here formally? Well, Jung's definition is pretty specific. It's that meaningful connection between your inner world, a thought, a dream, a feeling, and something that happens in the outside world. And the crucial part is this: there is no cause and effect. The beetle didn't appear because she dreamed it. Instead, Jung called this an acausal connecting principle. Basically, he was saying these two events are connected purely by their meaning, which hints at some kind of deeper hidden order in the universe.
So here's the roadmap for our explainer. First, we'll get a solid handle on the phenomenon itself and Jung's theory behind it. Then we'll get into the big problem. How do you get from a good story to hard data? The main event will be digging into the key findings from a groundbreaking 2024 study. And finally, we'll see how this all plays out in a therapy session and talk about the absolutely vital role the therapist plays in all this.
Okay, so let's just zero in on this phenomenon for a second. You have an inner state, the dream of a scarab, and an outer event, a real beetle at the window. They're not connected by cause, but by this powerful, resonant feeling of meaning. And it's that meaning that can actually spark real psychological change.
Now, Jung didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. He was actually working very closely with Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist. I mean, think about that. Pauli's work in quantum mechanics, with its mind-bending ideas about entanglement, really clicked with what Jung was seeing in his practice. Together, they started to wonder if maybe mind and matter weren't so separate after all. Maybe they were two aspects of one single reality, what they called the unus mundus, or one world, where these meaningful, acausal events could actually happen.
But here's the rub. For the better part of a century, synchronicity has pretty much lived in the world of amazing stories, just like the one about the scarab. And that's a huge problem. See, for psychotherapy to be taken seriously as a science, its ideas need to be backed by empirical evidence. Without that evidence, synchronicity just gets written off as cool storytelling, and a really powerful clinical insight gets pushed to the sidelines.
And this slide just lays out that divide perfectly. On one side, you have this really deep, personal, subjective kind of exploration. It's rich, it's meaningful, but it's super hard to generalize. And then on the other side, you have science, demanding evidence, stats, things you can replicate. The big challenge then has always been, how in the world do you bridge that gap? How do you study something so deeply personal with scientific rigor?
And that brings us to the heart of this explainer, a 2024 study by Gunnar Reefschläger that actually did it. The research team gathered and systematically analyzed 46 documented cases of synchronicity that happened inside psychotherapy sessions. They pulled these from interviews, surveys, and published papers, all to find out if there are real structural patterns to these incredible moments.
So what did the data actually show? Well, the first finding is really telling. In more than half the cases, 52%, the whole experience doesn't start with some dramatic dream. It starts with a quiet little internal signal, a premonition, or just a really strong gut feeling.
This quote from the study just captures that perfectly. You have this Italian analyst in training who's looking for a supervisor. She just follows her intuition. And then all these small, meaningful coincidences start popping up. The supervisor happens to speak Italian, her office is right across the street, they share the same professional interests. It was this cascade of little things, all pointing in the same direction, that told her she was on the right track. It shows how synchronicity can work like an inner compass.
Okay, and this is a really crucial point. This isn't just some vague feeling people are having. The study found that in a whopping 76% of all cases, that inner feeling, the intuition, the dream, lines up with a concrete, observable event out there in the real world.
And I mean, it doesn't get much more concrete than this. You've got a therapist, totally frustrated and stuck with the patient, thinking to himself, we are at a dead end here.
In that exact instant, the patient's phone, which, by the way, she never brings to therapy, just blurts out in its navigation voice, "You are at a dead end, please turn around." The moment just broke all the tension, brought some humor into the room, and helped them get past a really tough spot.
This data also paints a much more detailed picture of how this stuff actually happens. And it's a bit counterintuitive. The study found that most of these events aren't actually synchronous. They don't happen at the exact same time. 76% had a time delay. And on top of that, 67% happened in completely different places. This really drives home the point that the sync isn't about time or space. It's about the meaningful connection between the events.
But here it is. This is probably the single most important number from the entire study. In over 90% of the 46 cases they looked at, when a synchronistic moment happened, it had real positive effects on the therapy, on the relationship, and on the patient's life. This is the evidence. This is what elevates this whole concept from a philosophical curiosity into a powerful clinical reality.
So, if these moments are so overwhelmingly positive, how does it actually work in a therapy session? How does a weird coincidence transform into a turning point for healing and growth?
Let's look at this incredibly powerful case from the study. A trainee analyst had a really tough relationship with her mother and had been totally bottling up the grief she felt for her grandfather. During one session, she finally works up the courage to talk about him. Later, she finds out that her grandfather passed away at that very same hour. This profound coincidence became a massive turning point for her, making her sessions more emotionally intense and helping her carve out her own identity separate from her mother's.
But, and this is a big but, this therapeutic power isn't automatic. In fact, the study found a direct statistical link showing that the positive outcome of one of these events depends almost entirely on the therapist's attitude and how they react in that moment.
So the therapist's job in unlocking that potential really comes down to 3 key steps. First, they just have to be open to the possibility that what happened was more than just random. Second, they have to show genuine interest, which tells the patient, hey, what you experienced is valid and important. And third, and this is the most critical part, they have to work with the patient to explore and co-create what this moment means for them, providing what analysts call a safe container for that whole exploration.
The study also makes it really clear that the stakes here are pretty high. If the therapist just dismisses it or doesn't engage, all that positive potential can be lost. In fact, the effect can even be negative.
There's this one tragic case of a father who's grieving the death of his son. He's just finished his very last therapy session. As he and the therapist are saying goodbye in the garden, a magpie appears, the exact same type of bird the father had just been describing in a symbolic story about his son's grave. But the session was over. There was no time to process this incredibly poignant moment, and the study notes that when these events aren't discussed, the patient is often left feeling unsettled and alone with this powerful but totally unresolved experience.
So all of this leaves us with a final, really provocative question. This new research suggests that maybe we shouldn't think of synchronicity as just a strange event that happens to the people in the room. Maybe we should think of it as what's called the analytic third, an active, independent, meaning-making force that actually enters the therapeutic space. It's a phenomenon that, when you meet it with openness and curiosity, can be one of the most profound catalysts for change that therapy has to offer.